Hello, everyone. This is the SMC Journal podcast, and I'm Scott Moore, your host. This is the show where it's all about performance in IT today. If you're interested in performance testing, tuning, monitoring, engineering, really anything that has to do with making software or hardware more efficient and performing at its peak, this is the show for you. In today's episode, I really want to discuss something I feel like is getting a little bit forgotten about, just kind of taken for granted, if you will, because in every blog article, in every webinar, in every conversation, it's always about the continuing effort to shift left and get earlier feedback and making code efficient. From the moment code is either compiled or released, then by God, we got to know how well it performs before it ever. That's a great conversation to have. But you know what? There's also infrastructure sitting back there, whether you're a serverless application or not, whether you're cloud or you've got internal servers, it doesn't matter. There's still infrastructure sitting back there. And when I say infrastructure, I think most performance testers or engineers would think, oh, that's the servers he's talking about. Actually, I want to talk about the glue that holds it all together today, the network. Yes, I remember a time when the network was always under a microscope. It was always suspicious if anything got slow. It could never be the code, and it was never the CPU being 100% and queued for 5 minutes. It was always about, we got to have bigger pipes and more bandwidth. Give me more bandwidth, Scotty, right? And I just got to thinking about, we don't really talk about the network. Now we've got consumers with gigabit Ethernet directly into their house, fiber lines, and the cost has come down. It's almost taken for granted as a commodity, but we still have performance issues with the network. So what I wanted to do was bring in an expert who's dealt with the network and performance troubleshooting since the time that I'm talking about. And I'm talking about probably mid to late 90s and the early 2000s. That's when then I remember all the struggle with the network versus the application team and the server admins and the developers developing thick client applications, desktop applications, and things that really did take up a lot more bandwidth than they probably do today. So that's where I want to talk to my friend from Canada, Tony Fortunato, who's been there and done that. I interviewed him just a couple of days ago. It was a great conversation. Let's see what Tony has to say about some of the biggest issues he sees with network performance troubleshooting today. Hey, Tony, welcome to the SMC Journal podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you. So you are a person who is very familiar with the network, I'm told. Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience and your experience with network performance?
Sure. I'm Tony Fortunato from the from the technology firm. Basically, I've been doing this for over 30 years. I started off by building financial trading floors at the bank. And I've done that probably for over 10 years. Started off as a grunt pulling cables, ended off as a managing director. Since then, I've done nothing but performance troubleshooting for probably the last 20 years in all sorts of companies and various scenarios. And then lastly, I also built my own ISP about 15 years ago, which I'm currently on. So I've got a pretty wide experience across the board.
I don't think I've ever met anybody who has built their own ISP, so you're the guy. So it's 2022 when we're doing this interview, and I'm talking to developers, and they're like, bro, we don't need to worry about anything. We write code, it's fast, everything is serverless, everything is scriptless, everything is whatever less, and they don't seem to really be worrying about the laws of physics. So we don't have to worry about the network anymore, right, Tony?
Of course not. It just works. And this is part of the problem, right? Just because the light's green and you can ping something doesn't mean it's going to work well. This is the problem. The problem is not that it works well. That's the issue. And that's what I encounter all the time. So even when I go to people to help troubleshoot a problem, first thing you hear, hey man, I pinged that server, or I checked port 80, it's up, man. Like, what could possibly go wrong? And yeah, everything. So we have load balancers, we have routers, we have proxies, we have like anything between you and the destination could cause a problem, but then that's magnified when you add all the back end servers and all the other inter-server communication that you rely on just to make stuff work. And of course, DNS and now LDAP and your authentication protocols. All that jazz piles on to your happy little app to make it work well. And again, I'm not even touching on all the issues around things not working. That's easy. It's broken, fix it, move on. But when it doesn't work well, that's where people get tripped up. So I kind of this is where I struggle with people, because when I sit down with an analyst, they have a hard time wrapping their mind around that whole bit of not working well. And here's the thing, right? I've broken this down into three categories of things I try to look at. And we have good old tools. People never have the correct tools, be it hardware or software. Unfortunately, training, the guy who bought the tools might not be there anymore. So now the staff's left behind trying to figure out the software, the hardware, and the reporting and the thresholds and all that jazz. And then lastly, network oversight. And just because you got a client and a server doesn't mean you've got somebody watching all the pieces in the middle to make sure it works well. Because that's the leapfrog effect we've had for the last 30 years. We've had the PC was slow, and now the PC's fast. So now the server's slow. Oh, now the server's fast. The network is slow. Now the network is fast. But who's watching that? Who's watching the end-to-end architecture of your network? And very few, I'm going to say, if any, companies have watched that end-to-end progress as their network evolves.
I remember working for a very large firm back in the 90s, so we'll say mid to late 90s. And I can remember anytime there was any kind of a call to the support center where things were slow, it didn't matter what it was, the network people were like, they were on a hair trigger. They were so nervous that they were going to get blamed for it. Now remember, this is when people were just starting to get cable modems where they had like 3 meg downloads, and that was like crazy speed, right? We're just getting out of the dial-up modems. But I just remember anytime anybody would say, this thing is slow, the network people would go, order more bandwidth, order more cables, get another pipe in here, because they were so nervous they were just going to be. So they just kept going and going, and they never really optimized the applications for that. But what it sounds like to me, though, I was thinking, well, surely we're going to get a big enough pipe where that's not an issue. But are you telling me that even after all this time, it's still some of the same usual suspects of the problem?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and I'm in the process of writing a couple of articles on the combination of packet size and packet rate and how that affects performance. And it doesn't matter what the bandwidth is. It doesn't matter. You could have something pumping at 90% bandwidth utilization and everybody's going to be fine, but you could have a 13% bandwidth utilization and everybody's stopped dead in their tracks. And that could be, just a simple example of what we're talking about. We have, protocols that people aren't watching. We have all sorts of negotiation now with protocols and applications that just happen behind the scenes. And when that doesn't work out, it just doesn't work well. And again, I'm not talking about it down. I'm talking about you go do your transaction. There's a bit of a blip. You wait. Oh, there it is. And again, my background is the financial networks. We have a trader sitting there, hits sell or buy or sets his thresholds by the millisecond. If it's not met, he notices. That's money.
Interesting. Do you think that developers and I'm not trying to generalize developers, but do you think from your experience they think about how chatty their application is, and if they're rolling it out to say a mobile application, and how that network latency might affect their application? Or is that sort of a afterthought after they sort of get bit by the problem?
Yeah, I'm going to throw a number out. Maybe 30% of the developers I deal with can think about that proactively. The majority, though, exactly what you said. Something happens. Oops. I come in to help. They see the value of either protocol analysis or whatever tool I'm using at the time. And they're like, oh, man, we better get one of those, or we better get you back to baseline this when I'm done. And that is actually a good chunk of my business is customers calling me back saying, hey, application A is being upgraded next month. We want a baseline now. We want a baseline in the lab to make sure it's working right. Is it going to play nice with all of our load balancers and our addressing space and our filters and our firewalls? And there's an external component, blah, 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 right? So yeah, when you get bit once, then you're always looking out for it. But most people don't look for it ahead of time.
So if I understand what you said earlier, it's about looking at the right things, right? It's still about seeing what needs to be seen to fix the problem. Do you think network performance tools are there at this point where if you have them, we can actually see and get to those needles in the haystack and those problems faster?
I think it's still a silo. I think you've got your Wireshark, you've got your application performance tools, you've got your server performance tools, you've got your workstation performance tools for Linux or Android or Windows, and they're all still separate, right? Very few people are trying to make it I'm going to say a comprehensive solution. You find the I do everything routine from a lot of vendors, and they just don't do it well because they're trying to do too much. But I'm going to say the majority of the successful clients I've seen have to grow their own tools in-house. They write their own Python script, Perl scripts. PowerShell scripts, whatever they need to do to monitor stuff, because they don't have either the time, the resources, or the budget to go off and find a tool or a vendor that's going to fill that requirement.
Well, it sounds to me like you're going to still be pretty busy for quite some time in your profession. If anybody is having trouble with their network and they needed to contact you, how can they reach you?
Sure, it's simple. www.thetechfirm.com. All my articles are there. All my videos are there. There's no login. There's no fees. There's no advertising. There's no banners. There's no pop-ups. It's just stuff for you to use, stuff for you to read. And if you have any questions at all, there's a contact me form right on the page, and just shoot me an email.
That's awesome, Tony. And I highly recommend you check out Tony's work out there, his YouTube channel, his articles. They're great. I follow Tony very closely, and I really appreciate you being on the show and doing this with us, Tony.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye. So, what I heard, three biggest problems is as a company grows and their network evolves, nobody knows all those pieces and parts end to end. And so when things go bad, they don't really know where to find that problem. So it's a troubleshooting issue because they just don't know. Also, the training that would happen inside of a company. Whereas, and we're not talking about vendor training here, we're talking about network basics and sharing the information about our network. Here's the logical place that we would go if we had a problem with this. And people who are doing that troubleshooting not having the fundamentals. Performance engineers, does that sound familiar? Also, the tools, having the right tool and using the right tools to find those problems and getting to those problems quickly. That seems to be a big issue here. So what do you think? Do you think the network is still one of those things where it's a silo, like Tony said, and there's only this special group of people who can fix that, at least from a performance perspective? Or is that now moving into the role of another responsibility of the site reliability engineer, the find it and fix it engineer of the enterprise? You tell me. You can always reach me at scottmoore.consulting. You can reach out to me through LinkedIn. There's a URL to my profile as well as Twitter. My handle is @LoadTester. And there are many other ways to reach me as well, including by email, help@scottmoore.consulting, if you wanted to provide personal feedback to me. So I'd like to hear what you think about the network today and what kind of problems should we be over by now that we're still experiencing. What do you think? Have you subscribed to our YouTube channel? Last time I checked, as of the airing of this show, we're about 825 subscribers. We're close to 1,000. What happens when we breach 1,000 subscribers? Probably going to have a pretty good giveaway. So if you want to be part of that, help us get to 1,000, and everybody who subscribes will be eligible for that giveaway. I'm not going to say what it is yet, but I got a feeling it's going to be pretty good. You know, this show would not be possible without our wonderful sponsors, and that includes my friends at Micro Focus. They are the makers of the LoadRunner family of LoadRunner Professional, Enterprise, Cloud, and Developer. And did you know that performance matters? They have the largest community of practitioners, and there are links to their community, which is community.microfocus.com. You can also just scan that QR code. We're putting QR codes, if you didn't notice that, if you've never seen the show, this is something new. We put QR codes in there where you can just scan it and go to these pages. We've also got links to their performance engineering and LoadRunner family pages and their YouTube performance playlist as well. This podcast is also sponsored by our friends at Keysight Technologies, makers of Eggplant Performance. Eggplant Performance supports web, Citrix, and low-level TCP/IP protocols to meet your application performance testing needs, and it contains real-time monitoring and integrated test results analysis within the product. That's Keysight's Eggplant Performance software. Folk Consulting is also one of our major sponsors. They offer high-quality consulting services around application performance management, monitoring, system performance, application delivery, analytics, performance testing, and digital management. Any of these services, Ryan Folk has some of the most senior consultants that I know. I've known them for decades. They haven't just a few years of experience, they have decades of experience. And we really appreciate these sponsors making this show possible. Would love to hear from you. If you think we're on the right track, let us know. We would like to know the kind of topics that you want to see discussed here, and anybody that you would like for me to reach out to interview with, completely open to do that, because we want to talk about every aspect of performance on this show. And that may include companies that may directly compete with our sponsors. Can you believe that? But our sponsors have actually agreed to the fact that you don't have to just sit here and talk about our product alone. There's lots of things going on in the performance world, whether that's hardware, software at the code level, the network level. We want to dive into some things that are pretty deep on a few shows, but then we may also want to talk about things that are appealing to more of an executive level, who they don't want to get into the details, but they're interested in a high performing application, and they want to roll out stuff to production that actually works, not just functionally, not just security, but that it performs well. So there's lots of interest in all these areas, but I want to hear from you. So that's why I put the email out there on every episode. So until that time where we talk again, this is Scott Moore for the SMC Journal podcast, where it's all about performance in IT. We'll see you next time.